Excellent. Okay. There we go. Let me get to the right.
Hi, Emily. I hope you can hear me. I'm so happy you're on.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
Emily's at TVT with me, and she is fabulous.
Oh, wonderful. We're so happy to have you. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, which is really nice. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Olsheim, and I'm a congregant at Temple Bethel. And many of you might know me as the Parent in Me teacher. I did that for a little while, but I've basically been working in education for about 20 years. And I was a classroom teacher. I focused more on younger elementary, so preschool through kindergarten. But I found myself in the arena recently of doing a lot of parent education and everything from lactation education to infant care to classes like this. So my greatest role, my greatest job is that I'm the mother of 3 boys. I feel like it's worth mentioning their names because I'm definitely going to pepper in a story here and there. So Henry is my oldest, he's 15. And I have another teenage boy, Rowan, who's 13, and I have a 7-year-old, Thomas, who actually went through the ECC, and that's how I know many of you as well. So I get the great privilege of being their mom, and they have taught me many, many things that I'm going to share with you. But what I really have for you over the next 3 classes is a carefully curated list of concepts from parenting experts that I've studied for 20 years. They're psychologists, they're behavioral psychologists, they're neuropsychologists, pediatricians, and I have been following them and learning from them for a very long time. And I've kind of put together a highlight reel, if you will. And I kind of actually would like to think of it as a roadmap. It's very practical. These are what I'm going to share with you over the next 3 classes are very pragmatic skills that you can put to use on a daily basis, almost an hourly basis. And I think that you'll find it very useful. It's like a roadmap with turn-by-turn directions. And Rabbi Kavod, we're so fortunate to have him join us in this moment. It's really an honor to teach alongside him. And I think to have this time with our rabbi is just gold. And he's going to show you all the flowers along the way of this journey. So I'm going to give you turn-by-turn directions, and he's going to show you the beauty along the journey. So go ahead, Rabbi.
That's such a nice way of putting it. Oh, that's not where I wanted to go. Well, this is really, really a pleasure. And I want to put it right back at you, Elizabeth, that to have the opportunity to be able to share in this space and to learn from you and from the other parents that are on this call is invaluable. I also feel like even more important than any of the jobs or roles that I've ever had professionally in my life, being a parent is number one. The number one most important job in my life. And I've found, over the years as well, that like I've also been really interested in how do I be the best parent that I can be? How do I honor my kids? And have done my own kind of reading and interested in that, but also really find that so much of what I aspire to in my own life is very integrated with my own Jewish living and my own engagement with Torah. And I don't see Torah as something that is distant or separate from any part of my life. So it really is about, how do I practice these teachings and this wisdom that I engage with through Torah as a parent and bringing that. And so that's what I'm hoping to also share a little bit. And as Elizabeth and I were planning this and I was looking at what she had curated for us, it was also just all the stuff was, yes, I need to remember to do that more. And yes, I need to, like it was all these different pieces and roadmaps that made some of them I need as just reminders. And some of them were even new ways of saying, oh, you know what, that makes sense. I never thought of it that way. And so I'm hoping that you'll also have some of those aha moments.
Mhm.
The piece that I want to share with you, just a little Torah to open us up before we start, it feels really fundamental to me in this whole job of parenting. It's relationships in general, but especially with our children, which is that a 20th century philosopher and writer and Jewish thinker that some of us may be familiar with, Martin Buber. In his theology, he noted that we have two different primary ways that we can relate to other people, or, and I'll put it this way, even to our children in relationship. And what he really commented on, which is that we learn in our Torah that every person is made in the image of God. And I want to really suggest that when that idea, as we're using this morning, is not meant to talk about God as something separate from us or some kind of abstract concept, but really when we speak about God, we speak about the vitality and the depth and the aliveness that is in everything in our lives. So it's not separate from our lives, it's in our lives, and it's in the people that are in our lives. So to say that I can see somebody else in the image of God, or I can see the image of God in my children, that's not an idea for me. It's more of when I stop and am able to be present in a certain way, I see their beauty, I see their vitality, I see their aliveness, and I'm touched and I'm moved by something. That's to me what I mean about image of God. And Martin Buber says that when we see that in other people, when we can see that dignity and that aliveness and respect, we relate to them in an I-thou. We have an I-thou relationship. We acknowledge their thou-ness, their full aliveness, their full integrity. A lot of the time, against our best intentions, we have different kinds of relationships with people. And this includes our children, which is an I-it relationship, an I-it, that we look at other people as objects in certain ways. And when I say objects, I mean that they provide a function to us in a certain moment. They are playing a certain role in our picture of how things should be. And in that moment that they're playing that function or that role or that picture, we cease to see them in their full reality. We cease to see them in their full godliness. And what we're going to explore this morning as far as tantrums is perfect, because what is the biggest thing that we can say about tantrums 99% of the time in our children? They are inconvenient. They are inconvenient. They do not fit our plan for the day. We're going ahead and ready to do X, Y, or Z, and suddenly our child loses it. And really, we have to kind of shift completely and suddenly be present in a different way. And we needed to get to a certain place at a certain time. We needed to do a certain thing at a certain time. And our child is not letting us do that. And because we are relating to our child in that moment, and it's usually because we may be stressed, we may have a lot going on, but because of that, because we're functioning our relationship to them in an I-it relationship based on the schedule, go here, do this, all of this, their tantrum is forcing us in some way to either create more conflict and tension and frustration, or it forces us to shift from that I-it and be present. What does our child need in this time? And so it's just that particular model of being able to acknowledge that tantrums first and fundamentally are so difficult for us when we are relating to our child as in an I-it place. And just to even recognize that in the moment becomes the first step to being able to address it in a more full way.
Beautiful.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Beautiful. I love that. That's really a really nice way to set it up, because we're really today, if anything comes out of today's piece, it's going to be a way to tap into empathy. So that's a wonderful way to talk about it. Um, I pulled up this slide, this cartoon, because I thought it was funny. And I thought it really said a lot about how we all feel in this moment. Um, I have I have learned a lot about this topic because I gave birth to a professional tantrumer. My oldest son, Henry, who's now 15, and many of you know him, so you can speak to, I'm about to throw him under the bus quite a bit, but now that he's much older, many of you could attest to that he is a very lovely, lovely person, and not quite this picture that I'm about to paint, but he really was a professional tantrumer. From the moment he came into the world, he cried and screamed. Nothing changed about that in his infancy into becoming a toddler. It actually just got worse. And he anywhere and everywhere would shout, yell, scream, cry, throw fists at me. I mean, beat on my own body, throw himself to the ground, become boneless. I mean, he had all the moves. And I thought to myself, and my husband and I both are educators, we're both teachers. That's actually how we met. And I really thought, okay, I've got this. I know how to handle this. I know what to do here. But when it's your own child, and just like Rabbi said, you lose that perspective of looking at them as little people, because they're so dramatically affecting our own emotions. And I knew it was time to go get some professional help. So that's what I did. I went and I sought the professional help of a behavioral psychologist. It took session, one session. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to spend thousands of dollars trying to remediate this problem. One session, and I changed the entire culture of our family in one session. And here's why. Because 99% of the time, the issue is not with our children, it's not with our child, it's how we're handling it. It's not a behavior that we need to fix in the child, it's really behaviors that we need to change in ourselves. And that's really great news because we all know it's very, very difficult to change somebody else's behavior. That it's almost impossible. Over time, we of course shape and mold our children. That's our jobs, but to try to acutely change somebody's behavior is very difficult, but we can certainly make changes on our own. And so I am going to help you get there, and we're going to, and Rabbi Kavod and I are really going to be able to do this with a certain amount of ease, because we're going to really learn what is happening when our children are having a tantrum. So if you want to go ahead and switch that next slide. I think probably the most important thing I can share with you today is that tantrums are perfectly normal. They're developmentally appropriate. They are the building blocks to learning how to cope, how to delay gratification, how to deal with stressors. Just like our children need to crawl before they walk, how they learn to babble before they speak words and string those words into sentences, they need to tantrum. It's part of their growth and maturation. Unfortunately, we live in a society that looks at tantruming children and we immediately label the behavior as bad, that child's spoiled. And we often label the parent, they're indulgent, they're not setting boundaries. We're very judgmental, particularly about tantrums, because they're unpleasant for everybody. Everyone who is in the environment of one is sort of in the wake of a tantrum. So we have sort of cast this lens over them. But I think it's really, really important to know that those three skills, coping with difficult emotions, learning how to tolerate disappointment, and delaying gratification, believe it or not, all three of those skills, which are the pillars of maturation, stem from a tantrum. So let's take a look at, if we want to go to the next slide, we can look at this human brain model and really see that we all know our brains are divided into two hemispheres, and children have highly underdeveloped brains. In fact, human brains don't stop growing until about our mid 20s. And I'm really finding this to be true with teenagers in the house. You expect them to know more than they do, and then I have to remind myself that they have another decade of developing these skills. So young children in particular are completely right-brained. So that is where all the emotion is taking place, all the nonverbal communication, also all the creativity. The left brain is logic. It's language and problem solving, but they haven't really developed their left brain skill sets yet. So when we as adults shift seamlessly back and forth, we're really integrating both sides of the brain. And that's actually the term for it. It's called integration. And that comes with time, and it comes with actually learning. It's a steep learning curve to learn how to integrate both the left and the right side of the brain. And in fact, it's part of our jobs as parents to teach our children to slowly start to integrate those left brain functions. They're going to slowly start to problem solve. They're going to slowly start to use rationale. They're going to start to embrace logic and natural consequences and outcomes to certain decisions. But that really is our job, to teach them how to do that. And we're going to learn how to do that today. Rabbi?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to be talking more about it in our next session when we talk about effective communication. But what I think is important to really frame is that everything that we're talking about here, this session, everything with life, with relationships, with all of it is about communication. It's all about, and it's not something that is a kind of category in our life. It's something that's the foundation for our life, that really, even in the way that our Jewish tradition articulates the ongoing creation of the world and the creative process and building things and generating things is through communication, right? So God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, it's not about necessarily taking that story of creation literally. You can if you want, but mostly it's about saying that the Torah's vision is that creation happens through utterance, through communication, through expression. And in this case, tantrums are just another form of communication. Like Elizabeth was sharing, young people don't have the full development in left brain to be able to communicate what it is that they want in more effective ways that will help them get it. So, but there is very real needs and real things that they are trying to communicate. So part of the shift here in being able to deal with this, when Elizabeth says that it's absolutely normal, it's being able to realize that our kid is not having a tantrum because they're trying to be manipulative, that they could do it differently, they could express their feelings differently, but they're choosing to do it this way to get what they want, which in some sense, I don't know about you, I've gone down that rabbit hole in my mind before with tantrums, of that somehow there's the feeling of, not only is it inconvenient, but you could do it in such a different way and you're not. As soon as we realize they're trying to express something, they're trying to create, they're trying to offer whatever, and they just aren't able to, it's a lack of skills, it's a lack of brain development, it's a lack of all those things. That's the reason why it's coming out in this particular way. That awareness can help us be able to say, okay, what is it that they are wanting to communicate? What is important to them right here? And can I be able to tolerate the unpleasantness of whatever is going on so that I can really be here for them?
That's right. And I threw in those slides of Kate Middleton because I thought certainly we can embrace the notion that we're not alone. If the most practically perfect person on the globe is dealing with her children's tantrums as well. So this is really what I mean, is that it is not specific to a certain type of child. It's not specific to a certain type of parenting. All children do tantrum, and again, it's part of their development. So we know that tantrums are, like Rabbi Kavod said, incredibly inconvenient. Um, I They're unpleasant for the child. I always have said tantrums are loud, they're wet, and they're physical. They are loud. There's a lot of, forgive me, saliva, snot. I mean, it can get ugly, right? It's not a pleasant moment, even physically speaking. And they can be very physical. Like I said, I was, a punching bag at times when Henry was so young that he really could not express his feelings in words, and it really came out physically. It's for the parent, we have our own visceral reaction. It becomes a very fight or flight moment for some of us. We can feel the stress welling in us. We see that the tantrum is kind of rising. We see it coming on, and it becomes a panicked moment. I truly, and I still have a little PTSD from the years that I was mishandling my children's tantrums. And I have to always kind of center myself and remember the skill sets that I do now have, because I have such a visceral reaction. We're going to learn in these turn by turn directions how to handle the tantrum. Rabbi Kavod, did you want to jump in here, or should I?
You keep going, but the only thing I want to say about that, about as you're reflecting to your mishandling of things, for all of us as parents here too, just like our kids are doing the best they can to express their feelings or whatever, we are all doing the best we can with the skills. And if we don't handle things skillfully, that's just because in that moment, we either don't have the resources, the emotional resources in that moment for whatever's going on, or we don't have the intellectual resources yet of, how to, but we have always cared deeply about our kids and being there for them. And so it's just a remembering that as we give them a pass, our kids a pass in their tantrums, to allow us to be present for them, we should give ourselves our own pass as well. That we're also doing the best that we can.
Absolutely. I mean, there really is a learning curve on our part as well. And this takes practice. You will get better. We will all get better at handling this. And just in the last, I know, Rabbi Kavod, you said when you were preparing for this talk, and we met to sort of prepare for this talk, in the week that passed since then, I was a better mom for having brought all these thoughts to the forefront of my mind. But okay, so we're in the tantrum. Let's get into this here. We're in the tantrum. The child is having a reaction, and I really define tantrums as an extreme sense of disappointment and frustration on the child's part. That's really what it is. It's an expectation that they had that didn't get met. So they are extremely frustrated and extremely disappointed. And that comes out all in a right brain way with emotion. So the first thing we really need to do is name that emotion. We need to validate them. We tend to rush in and we tend to try to placate and negotiate and try to bring in all those left brain skill sets that we have and try to explain away the moment. But really what we need to do is just name their feelings. So we want to say things like, oh wow, I can see you are really angry right now. I can see that you are so frustrated because you didn't want to leave the playground and now it's time to go home. I can see that you are so mad at me right now because you wanted a cookie before lunch and I said you had to wait after. Just validate them. That goes a long way. And we all know from our own experiences with our our spouses even that if we can sort of step into the shoes of the other person and validate the feeling that they're having, that immediately diffuses the moment. It diffuses a lot of tension out of the moment. So we're going to validate their feelings. We're just going to name the emotion they're feeling. And then this is the hard part. We're going to stop talking.
And
And if you're
Elizabeth,
anything like me, this is tough.
and I want to just say about this is tough, really tough for me too. This is where, and what I notice is where I go here, when I go to, like it's always like step one has been something that I've always been trying to practice with everybody, is with my kids too, right? So you're there, I validate it, I go ahead and I've put back and I feel like, okay, I did step one. Now I jump to step two. And why do I jump to step two right away? Because that tantrum is inconvenient
Yeah.
and I want it to stop. I want it to stop on my timetable. And so all of the reason, the negotiating, the explaining, and the placating, the attempt to fix it in
Mhm.
that moment is still based on me vacillating into that it place with the child. So they had the tantrum. I'm like, okay, I need to be present for the tantrum. I'm in an I thou place with you. Okay, so I'm in an I thou place. I'm there with my kids. I validate what's going on for them. Here it is. I'm feeling, and all right, done enough of that. Ready for this tantrum to stop. Moving to trying to fix it. And in that moment, what I've done is I've shifted the focus off them and onto me. It's now about me and they are the it. It's
Mhm.
now about what I want to see things happen. And you gotta change. And so all of the not stop talking, the reason, the negotiating, the explaining, the placating is all coming that I have now shifted into an I that it relationship with them. And that's
Mm.
I would say my biggest challenge.
For me too. I I really struggle with this even to this day. And when I told you earlier that I was able to really change the culture in our household in one session with one behavioral psychologist, it's because she taught me how to do this. She basically told me, she had me walk her through a couple typical tantrums, typical pitfalls that we were finding ourselves in on a daily, sometimes hourly basis. And she, at the end, she looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, Elizabeth, that's the problem. You have got to stop talking." And this takes practice. But what you have to remember is the more we explain, negotiate, placate, our words are like oil on the fire. Every time we try to rationalize why we had to disappoint them, we are just fanning those flames. And they really need the time to just absorb their feelings or absorb your validation and work out the feelings. And like Rabbi Kavod said, that's on their timetable. So we have to just stop and wait, and we stay present. So we can go to the next slide. We really are conditioned in our society to be taught that best way to deal with the tantrum, the best way to get your child to stop tantruming is to ignore them. Just ignore the tantrum. You'll extinguish the behavior over time. That might actually even be true, but it has a really detrimental consequence, because by ignoring the tantrum, by physically exiting when your child is having those big feelings, you're not just saying your behavior is so unacceptable that I'm not going to acknowledge it. You're really saying your feelings are so unacceptable that I'm not going to acknowledge them. I'm going to leave. So it's, while we're not going to speak, our physical presence, by staying physically connected to our child and staying in the room, is incredibly supportive. We're not going to talk because that's fanning those flames, but we're going to hang out close by. And you can take the pressure out of that moment. You don't have to make eye contact with your child. You don't have to get down and low with your child. You could actually look somewhat busied or distracted. An example could be, if this is happening in your kitchen, you could be kind of unloading the dishwasher. You're giving them time without pressure of sort of standing over them, like you're tapping your foot, like, okay, anytime now, finish up. You're just giving them the space. Like, you validated the emotion, and now you're giving them the space to feel their feelings. We also really have an obligation with younger children, in particular, toddlers, to stay close by, because we have to ensure their safety. When we talked earlier about tantrums being loud, wet, and physical, they can be dangerous to them, a danger to themselves if they're thrashing around or throwing themselves, at things, and that can very much be a trait of a tantrum. So we really want to stay close by to validate their emotions in a present way, and also just to ensure their safety as well.
The one thing I want to add about this, that is where this step also can be really tough, is if we find that it's not that we're walking away or we're going away because we're intentionally trying to punish, but because we've actually reached kind of our own threshold, and we do not trust ourselves to be able to be present for our child in a way that doesn't throw more oil on the fire, doesn't escalate the situation, because that can certainly, it can certainly happen in those moments. And so obviously, if we do have another parent in the house at the moment that it's happening, and we have found that we've reached that threshold, really great to enlist that other parent to help and be present while we take a break, so we can take some deep breaths and kind of cool down. But if we don't have that option, it becomes a really difficult choice to say, okay, and we really need to, it's kind of like really building our skills. Ultimately, we want to stay close. We need to stay close by, whatever, and we need to be able to find ways to manage our own feelings in that moment. So a good breathing exercises are so important. A real simple one is just have your inhale be to the count of 6, hold it for a count of 6, and let it go for a count of 6. This kind of controlled breathing. And you can do that. It could be a count of 4. It doesn't have to be a count of 6. But what I find is that if my mind is racing with that kind of emotion and that stress of, how dare you explode right now, whatever it is that we're the story that's going on in our heads while our kid is having a tantrum that's not enabling us to be present, to just say, okay, do the breathing, do the breathing, do the breathing. And the breathing and focusing on that, it takes the focus off that mind racing. It begins to de-escalate things. You know, if we can do that and still stay present in this way, that is the best thing. If we can't, and again, it's not a safety issue with really, really young kids, we may need to have to make the choice in that moment to say, it's actually better for me to move away right now, you know, because I know that if I don't, I will just unleash on, on my child or whatever it is. And it's better to take that space than kind of unleash in that moment. But we have to ask that question, can I stay present right now, and try to use those skills to be able to do it.
Absolutely. And it does take practice. I think that to temper our own right brain response in those moments really takes practice. We're trying to remain neutral. Remember, it's our child who's having the feeling. We tend to make it about ourselves. And the best thing we can do is try to stay neutral. And if taking a few steps away and a few deep breaths is going to allow you to do that, then absolutely. And you can even tell your child in the throes of screaming and crying, and they'll hear you. You know, you can say, I can see you're really upset and you're having really big feelings. I'm upset too. I'm gonna go into the living room, and I'm gonna just take a couple big breaths, and I'm gonna come back and check on you. And that's really okay. It's we don't have to have a we don't have to always look like we have it together, you know. Demonstrating that we're coping with our own emotions is really great modeling for our kids. So we're in the middle of this giant tantrum. Actually, if we could go back one more. Oh, actually, sorry, you're right. You're right, Camilla. Here we go. We're gonna look as we're in this big moment. We're gonna look for the de-escalation. We're gonna look for that exit window. There are some physical cues. You'll hit a fever pitch in the tantrum, and then you'll start to see that the volume is getting lower. The physical demonstrations are getting more subtle. If they're kicking and screaming, maybe the flailing starts to wind down a little bit. The intense crying might get down to a and there you can see that it's coming down. When you feel that they have essentially come down to the point where you could now step back in, and I call this the exit window, you can start to reconnect through communication, and you can say, you're really helping them down off this ledge. You can say, are you ready for a hug now? Or would you like to come sit on my lap? That may be too soon. You may jump in too soon and rev the whole thing back up. And that will happen. I guarantee it. I've timed the exit window wrong many, many times. And then you just have to sort of, again, recenter yourself and wait and be patient. Let them work through those feelings. And this time, maybe wait a little bit longer until you offer them that helping hand. And usually it's a physical demonstration, particularly with little children. You're going to want to hold them, touch them, love on them a little bit. They've just been through something. They just went through a traumatic emotional moment, and now they need to be saved. So offering that loving gesture is an important piece in this. Okay, so we've got them on our laps, we're holding them, things are much calmer. This is the time where we actually, I call it the paradigm shift, which it's really just, let's look for the positive distraction. This is not the time to try to make this a teachable moment. We are not going to talk about the tantrum. We're not going to talk about the behavior that incited the tantrum. We're not going to talk about anything related to that moment. We're really going to just completely exit out of that moment by saying, let's go outside and see if the mail came. Let's go see if the garbage man has come emptied the garbage trucks. Let's see if we can go find a roly-poly. We're just really looking to get them completely back to neutral and to a place where they're integrated and happy and balanced again. So that's, it could really be anything. Your kids well, just anything that's a positive distraction in that moment. You can go to the next one. Okay, the revisit. So this is y- we've worked through sort of the 5 steps, if you will, of the 4 steps, I should say. Well, 5, sorry, miscounting, of how to get through the moment of the tantrum. And this is our chance as parents. This is really an opportunity for us as parents to help our children develop those left brain skills. We're going to help them understand their own feelings. And we do that by narrating the story of their tantrum back to them. And I have the picture of bath time up there because this was really when we worked through most of our feelings was during bath time when my kids were really little. Now that they're a little older and if we hit a rough patch, I find that driving in the car is a great time. It's what you don't want is an intense moment where you're looking into their eyes and they're looking into your eyes, and what they're feeling is a lecture. That's not what we're trying to achieve here. We're just really trying to retell the story of their feelings. So what we're going to do is just narrate. And for younger kids, toddler age kids, this is not really an interactive discussion. This is really you just talking. And you might say things like, you were really, really upset today when it was time to leave the playground. I told you we had to go because we had to go pick up your brother, and you had big, big feelings about that. And and we're going to try to be objective. You got very angry. You went down on the ground. You kicked, you screamed, you cried, but we still had to leave the park. We still had to go. And all that crying and all that shouting, it didn't really help you. It was just really hard for you. So maybe next time when we go to the park and mommy tells you we're going to have to go in 5 minutes, maybe you'll remember that all of those big feelings didn't really help you. And then you stop. You just stop the story there. And sometimes they're going to say something amazing back to you. Oftentimes, yeah, you're right. That really didn't help, did it? And they'll just completely synthesize this little narration of a story and demonstrate that I got you, I get it. Other times you're going to get nothing back, but they absorbed it. They absorbed that story. They absorbed you trying to explain those big feelings they were having. With older children, it will be more of an interactive discussion. Um, it might be more of a conversation, and you can take their lead on it. Again, we don't want to lecture and we don't want to offer judgment. We just really want to explain that the cause and effect didn't work, that we had a disappointing moment, but the tantrum, while it was a demonstration of the disappointment, it didn't change the outcome of what needed to happen. So you can navigate that with the conversation of that with a slightly older child.
And what I'll just add to that, and then I think it would be good, if it's okay, Elizabeth, for us to just we have a few more ideas.
Sure.
I'm conscious of the time. We have a few more ideas to share, but maybe some time to open up for questions or comments a little bit, because this is a lot that we've been able to digest. But what I want to share is, let me just stop this for a moment so we can see each other, is that Torah and how our tradition deals with stories, right, which is our Torah, is so instructive to this step that Elizabeth is sharing with us about doing the revisit. And it's so instructive because we don't have a tradition that says, okay, read the story of the Torah and we know exactly what it means. We know exactly what it means and we know exactly what we should do. Certainly there are things that seem straightforward about like not killing people and, and observing Shabbat is a good thing. But really, when we start to get into the nuance of life, the story of the Torah might hint in certain directions, but doesn't provide that full kind of clarity. Observing Shabbat is great. Well, how do you observe Shabbat? How do you do those things? And the unique piece of Judaism is this tradition we have of midrash, which is that the rabbis would look at the story of the Torah and they would interpret it in a way that they felt like was most helpful for us to stay connected to each other and to God. They could interpret different things, and there are lots of different interpretations for one story in the Torah. You could interpret it in ways that help, that we feel not as connected, more disconnected. And certainly much of us who might have not had great formative experiences of religion have had the Torah interpreted to us in a way that's about punishment, and you do this, and if you don't do this, you're not a good person, you're not a good Jew, you're not a whatever. That's a particular mode of interpreting the story. But the other ways, and what the rabbis really sought, is how do I interpret this story in a way that helps me feel and it be most connected to life, most connected to the people around me, and able to move forward. And so that becomes the revisit with our child too. How can we help them frame the story of what happened, like Elizabeth said, in a way that doesn't provide judgment? It's not about making them feel bad about it. But how do they understand the story in a way that might even be empowering, give them validating, give them hope of different possibilities and options that can happen, that can normalize it? Wow, you're really on a growing journey here. You're really learning, how do I take these big feelings that are going on inside me and be able to communicate them in ways that help me get what I want, or help me connect, or deal with those things. And that piece of how we share that story has great potential to lead us and our child in a more connected way next time. And we don't always, there's no formula for how to do this, just like there's no formula for how to interpret Torah in a way that will help us be most connected. But if we're asking the question always, how do I interpret this story in a way that brings more love, more connection, then our own innate creativity with our child can come forward. There was the great Rabbi Menachem of Chernobyl, 19th century Hasidic master, said, if you don't hear the Torah, every word of the Torah being about love, then you're not getting it. You're not getting it. People don't, wow, that's incredible to say. If somehow it's not leading back to a place of connection and love, you're missing it. So how can we ask that question? So is it okay, Elizabeth, if we just open it up a little bit? There's important stuff we want to get back to, but maybe even 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll go a little over 12.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone have any questions about what we've covered, or any specific pitfalls that they want some advice on? Is it all sort of making sense in terms of, hi, Jen, go for it.
Like you, Elizabeth, I have a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old as of Sunday who just walked into the room. 12-year-old has an attitude now, not tantrums, but now an attitude. How do you find dealing with that? Because I'm sure you've had the same thing.
I am in the throes of that. So
you want to save that, Elizabeth, at all for
I can answer it briefly. And there's really so much about that step one, the validating of the emotion, that can take us so far. Like I said, in all of our relationships, and Rabbi Kavod said the same thing. And I am so much better at handling Thomas's emotions than I am at handling Rowan's. There's just no doubt about it. But I think what I try to remember is step one. I don't need to go in and fix it. I don't need to provide a solution. I don't need to provide an answer. I just need to validate the feeling. And the attitude, if you can just get past that lens, Jen, of the attitude, there's a feeling, there's an emotion behind that. And I'm sure if you could just pause and go, okay, what's causing him to be so snarky right now? and get to that root cause, then you can start to go, look, I know you're feeling really disappointed, really frustrated, whatever the word is, and get to that. Don't discipline in that moment. It's so hard when we're being talked to disrespectfully to not make that the focal point. Just take it. We signed up for that job. Get to his emotion and see if that helps.
That's
It
beautiful.
does. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and to just the preview, the next session on effective communication
Yes,
will
we're going to do more
will
of that.
definitely go right into that and be very applicable for kids, teenagers too, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions? Any specifics?
All right, so
jump
I'll go back to the slides.
Okay.
And we have just
Yeah, we just have a
just two
couple more
more here.
minutes. Here we go.
Oh, hold on.
Here we go. Okay, so front loading. This is a very common term in education, and again, it's funny. I'm a much better teacher than I am a mom most of the time. I have patience and empathy that I have for other people's children that I only wish I could have for my own. But I have really found that when we front load our children, which is really just setting the expectations up in advance, painting the picture of what our day is going to look like, or what the moment even is going to look like, before the stakes are high, before there's any emotion infused in it, sometimes hours before, it is remarkable how much more successful the outcomes are. So I really use these words. I mean, I use the words or the term the plan. Man, did I use that word. Gosh, all day long, every day, 7 days a week. When my kiddos were little, we would start out every day and I'd say, let's talk about the plan for today. And I would do this broad strokes version of what our day was going to look like, the plan. But I knew there was going to be some flagged moments in that. So I laid out some broad stroke kind of, I guess I laid out the broad strokes early on in the day. And then when we got to that moment where I knew could be dicey, could be difficult, as we were heading into that specific moment, I would go into the plan in a micro way. So let me give you an example. We're starting our day. Let's talk about the plan. You're going to finish breakfast and then we're going to get ready for school. I'm going to take you to school. And this can be interactive. And then you could even pepper some questions in so they feel empowered. Do you think you're going to want to wear your red jacket or your blue jacket to school? Do you want this in your lunch or that in your lunch? And give them those empowering options. And then you're gonna have a great day at school, and I'm gonna pick you up from school, and we have to go to Target today. Okay, I don't know about you moms, but Target was like a nightmare for me. So I learned to say, as we were leaving school and getting in the car and heading towards Target, I learned to say, we're gonna go to Target now. And I really did this. I would hand my little person the list and I'd say, oh, you want to hold the list for me? I've got all the things on the list that we're going to get at Target. We need to get dish soap, paper towels, toilet paper, and, cookies. Or maybe not cookies, dish soap, paper towels, and toilet paper. And I'd say, we're only going to get these 3 things on the list. nothing more. We're just going to get the items on the list. And that's a moment where I was front loading so that we didn't have a DEFCON 4 meltdown on the toy aisle, because I didn't take the moment to prepare him for the disappointment of not getting a toy. So there's a million examples of this. It could be, you know, I know you love to go to the rock garden after school, but today we have to kind of rush out because we have to go pick up your sister. So today, and this is hours before, today we're not going to go to the rock garden, but we go to school again on Friday. Would you like to go to the rock garden on Friday? Again, we're giving them that little piece of empowerment, but we've set it up long before they have the expectation and their own plan that they were going to the rock garden. And if we can remember that tantrums are really nothing more than extreme feelings of disappointment. I mean, it's just, we've come along and it's like a sucker punch to them. They didn't know that they couldn't go to the rock garden. Nobody told Henry he couldn't get a toy that day. But if you set it up ahead of time, it will go so much more smoothly. So it takes a lot of mindfulness, and I know Rabbi Kavod is really a pro at talking about mindfulness, but we really have to be mindful about, we have to slow down as parents and be mindful about how we want to set our day up for success with our little ones. So you can't be rushing through.
It's so important. And I'm also, this connects right back to this I, thou, I, it relationship. You know, again, doing this front loading is treating our child like a whole person, right? Like a divine image with their own needs and feelings and experiences, not just a pawn in our plan, right? If you think about the experience for young children, we don't always, but they are totally powerless about their lives, you know, all the way through. Go to this place, do this. They're completely at the whim of their parents. And there's just the expectation almost that we have that, yeah, they're going to go ahead and do it, because if we're relating to them as an I, it, you know, then of course you should be my chess piece that I move from here and here and here. And I really say it in those words because, you know, the last thing we want to think about our kids or ourselves is that we're relating to them like chess pieces, you know, that goes on. But I think there's ways in which we forget. And then we get awakened when they become a teenager because, you know, and I'm now, I did mention, so Levi's almost going to be 17 in April. Aiden's becoming bar mitzvah in June. And then Aviv is almost 8. But, you know, had to, you know, Aiden's almost getting there, but for Levi, there was a moment anymore where, you know, it just wasn't okay to just plan the schedule without checking in with him first, you know, and he's absolutely right. Like, you know, like I'm not just a pawn in your game. I have my own plans. I have my own things that are going on, you know, like, and really when we're talking about young children, they have their own plans. Too. They have their own reality, and it may be something that's happening in the middle of their game or whatever. So this front loading piece is just another way that we are treating them as a thou, as an I thou relationship, as a full being. And of course it doesn't mean that they get to make all the choices of that we're gonna cater to what their whims are. You know, there still is a household that needs to be run, and there still are things that are safety, but by giving them that option to let them know ahead of time what we're doing, giving them those choices, we show them respect.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, and there's our last slide.
I love this quote. I really do. Carrie Conti is, she's an incredible parent educator. She's really a guru. If has anyone heard of her? Anyone? Julie's nodding her head. I mean, she really is quite inspiring, and she has, I could include her blog information in the next session, but she she said this at some point. I came across this quote of hers: children are not trying to give you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And I always try to remind myself of this. And this really speaks to what Rabbi Kavod said at the very beginning. It's inconvenient for us, but we have to get back to that place of empathy and remember that that demonstration is coming from an emotional place, a true feeling that they're having. So if we can find that compassion and that empathy in that moment, it's going to create connection. And when we're connected, we always have, children are always more willing to be more compliant when they're connected, and they tend to try to, have more, I guess, oppositional behavior when they feel disconnected. So we always want to get back to that place of empathy for connection.
All right. Any last comments or questions before we close? Let me put this, stop this share here.
Well, we'll dive deeper into communication next time, and really get into some of the deeper, I guess, meaning of how important communication is, and how that is just the foundation for all connectivity, all connection. I hope you can join us for that, and we'll take it from there.
All right.
Oh,
Take
I
care.
think Miles has his hand up. Hi,
Before
Miles.
we go, Elizabeth and Rabbi Kavod, I would just like to thank both of you for taking the time to put this amazing presentation together and connecting our congregants together and providing us with skills that can not only help us with children, but these could be useful skills for my wife to help me and Izzy. So I really appreciate everything that you've done in our committee and for everything that you've done for our community. And Rabbi Kavod, as always, you know how much I love and appreciate everything that you do. You're always there for all of us. And for that, I thank you and thank everyone for attending.
Thanks, Miles. And for all of you, if you don't know, Miles is the chair of our Adult Education Committee. So if you want to see more kinds of programming like this, we really want to make sure that we have programs for families and young educational programs, this kind of thing. Please communicate and let us know, and we'll continue to do these things. But see some of you next week.
Yes.
Thank you so much.